The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees says children spend several hours a day collecting water and food, often carrying heavy weights.
In a world increasingly challenged by climate change and overpopulation, water scarcity has emerged as one of the most pressing global crises, forcing nations to pour billions into colossal infrastructure just to keep taps running.
We urge every country to do whatever is necessary for the second stage of negotiations.
Yet, while many regions wrestle with droughts and dwindling reserves, few places illustrate the brutal immediacy of this struggle like the Gaza Strip.
Where to run? Where's safe? Gunshots ring out.
Where access to water is not merely a developmental concern, but a matter of day-to-day survival. In Gaza, water is not just scarce, it is a lifeline rationed, bargained for, and often out of reach, laying bare the extreme disparities in global water access. But there is hope for a better future, even amid the ravages of war. Today, we'll see how they are removing all the salt from the Mediterranean. And it worked. Let's get started.
Israeli missiles have destroyed the intensive care unit and surgery department of the only hospital still functioning in Gaza City, the Al Ahli Baptist Hospital.
The Gaza Strip's severe water crisis. The Gaza Strip is home to approximately 2.2 million Palestinians. Other than a prolonged siege and a brutal war, this densely populated region faces an acute water crisis. This is not a new problem. Gaza's arid climate contributes significantly to its water scarcity. The region receives minimal rainfall, approximately 6 inches or 150 millimeters annually, concentrated between January and March. This limited precipitation is insufficient to replenish the Gaza coastal aquifer, the primary source of fresh water for the population. Unfortunately, nearly 97% of the water from this aquifer is deemed unsafe for consumption due to high salinity and contamination from sewage infiltration. Compounding the issue, Gaza lacks natural lakes and possesses only seasonal wadis, or dry riverbeds that depend on rainfall. Most surface water sources are unreliable or inaccessible. The majority of water resources are located in neighboring Israel, and reports suggest that Israel diverts significant amounts of water for its agricultural needs, leaving Gaza with limited inflow. This presents the perfect storm, even as a bloody war rages on in the region. The survival of not only Gaza, but other water-scarce regions like it depends on innovation. That innovation is our story for today. But let's get some context first. The persistent Israeli-Palestinian conflict has severely damaged Gaza's water infrastructure. In May 2024, reports indicated that Israeli bombings had destroyed or damaged over 50% of Gaza's water facilities, including treatment plants, wells, and pipelines. This destruction led to a drastic reduction in water availability, with residents receiving as little as 4.74 litres per person per day, which is far below the emergency minimum standard of 15 litres. The lack of clean water has precipitated public health crises, including outbreaks of waterborne diseases. Without functioning treatment plants, tens of millions of gallons of raw sewage are discharged daily into the Mediterranean Sea, creating health hazards that affect Gaza, neighboring countries, and the broader region. In response to the water scarcity, Gaza has turned to desalination as a solution. Over 150 desalination plants have been established in the past decade, with approximately 80% privately operated. These facilities produce about 5,000 cubic meters of fresh water daily. However, this supply meets only a fraction of Gaza's needs, with estimates suggesting that desalinated water serves between 15,000 to 66,000 people daily, representing just 0.6% to 2.6% of the population. The reliance on desalinated water has led to increased costs, making it unaffordable for many residents. Before the recent conflicts, less than 4% of fresh water was drinkable, and the surrounding sea was polluted by sewage. The Mediterranean Sea offers a potential lifeline for Gaza's water crisis through large-scale seawater desalination projects. Desalinating seawater could alleviate the over-extraction of the coastal aquifer, providing a more sustainable and abundant water source. The United Nations has recognized this potential, supporting initiatives like the Gaza Desalination Project, which aims to produce 55 million cubic meters of potable water annually. However, the implementation of such projects faces significant challenges, including political complexities, funding constraints, and the technical demands of constructing and operating large-scale desalination facilities. Additionally, the ongoing conflict poses risks to infrastructure, as evidenced by the destruction of water facilities during military operations. The humanitarian situation in Gaza remains critical. In December 2023, UNICEF reported that displaced children in southern Gaza were accessing only 1.5 to 2 liters of water daily, well below the recommended minimum for survival. This scarcity has led to increased reliance on unsafe water sources, heightening the risk of dehydration and waterborne diseases. Over-reliance on the coastal aquifer. The Gaza Strip relies heavily on a singular water source, the Gaza coastal aquifer. This aquifer, which stretches beneath Gaza and parts of Israel, serves as the primary and, for the most part, the only viable freshwater resource for the region. Over 5,000 wells are used by local communities, both for domestic consumption and agriculture. However, the continued extraction of water from this source at unsustainable rates is gradually rendering it incapable of meeting the population's needs. The most alarming aspect of the Gaza coastal aquifer's overuse is the severe imbalance between the volume of water being extracted and the amount that naturally replenishes the aquifer. Gaza's wells extract approximately 47 billion gallons of water each year, while the aquifer's natural replenishment is estimated to be just 16 billion gallons annually. This means the region is extracting nearly 3 times more water than can be replaced, a practice that has led to a rapid depletion of this already limited resource. As the aquifer is overdrawn, the groundwater levels have begun to drop significantly, exacerbating an already dire situation. The over-extraction of the Gaza coastal aquifer has triggered another catastrophic consequence: seawater intrusion. This occurs when the excessive pumping of groundwater causes salt water from the Mediterranean Sea to seep into the aquifer, effectively contaminating the freshwater supply. The results of this intrusion are devastating, as the salinity levels in the water rise beyond what is considered safe for consumption by the World Health Organization. According to WHO guidelines, water with a salinity higher than 500 milligrams per liter is considered unfit for drinking. In Gaza, however, the salinity levels often exceed 2,000 milligrams per liter, making the water not only undrinkable but also harmful to human health. The resulting scarcity of clean, fresh water has dire consequences for the population. While some people rely on water imported from Israel or desalinated water from private plants, these solutions are often insufficient and unaffordable for many families. Desalination plants, while helping in some areas, face constant operational challenges and are heavily reliant on electricity, which is scarce due to the ongoing conflict. The combination of limited freshwater resources, the degraded quality of available water, and the high cost of alternative water sources has made it increasingly difficult for the people of Gaza to meet their daily water needs.
If water is life, then its denial is certain slow death.
The political and economic constraints placed on Gaza by the blockade, as well as the persistent conflict, have further hindered any meaningful efforts to address the over-reliance on the coastal aquifer. Efforts to mitigate the over-reliance on the Gaza coastal aquifer have been limited. Regional initiatives aimed at improving water management have not succeeded in addressing the scale of the problem. Some projects, such as the construction of desalination plants and efforts to improve rainwater harvesting, have made incremental progress but have not been able to resolve the crisis in any substantial way. Given the lack of viable alternatives, Gaza's future water security hinges largely on the ability to manage the coastal aquifer more sustainably, though this is a monumental task given the region's limited resources and ongoing conflict. To combat the overuse of the coastal aquifer and reduce seawater intrusion, Gaza needs a multi-pronged strategy. One potential solution involves reducing water consumption by encouraging more efficient use of the available resources. Public awareness campaigns and water conservation measures could help mitigate the strain on the aquifer, though these would require significant investment in education and outreach programs. The implementation of modern irrigation techniques, such as drip irrigation, could reduce water waste in the agricultural sector, which consumes the largest portion of Gaza's water supply. Furthermore, improving the region's wastewater treatment infrastructure to allow for the reuse of treated water for non-drinking purposes could alleviate some of the pressure on the aquifer. This would not only reduce the demand for fresh water, but also provide a sustainable water source for agriculture and industry. However, these measures can only go so far without addressing the broader political and economic issues that hamper the development of Gaza's water infrastructure. The lack of coordination between Gaza and Israel regarding shared water resources remains a significant barrier to resolving the crisis. The region's water crisis is not merely a result of natural scarcity, but is exacerbated by geopolitical factors and infrastructure challenges. Without significant changes in water management practices, alongside international support and cooperation, the people of Gaza will continue to face an uncertain and increasingly dire future when it comes to securing access to clean and safe water. Only through coordinated efforts and sustainable water practices can Gaza hope to overcome the overwhelming challenges posed by its over-reliance on a single, overstretched water source. Even good old capitalism is failing to address the issue in full: the ineffectiveness and cost of private water vendors. In Gaza, the dire water crisis has pushed many residents to rely on private water vendors as an alternative source of drinking water. These vendors have become a necessary yet expensive lifeline for people who cannot access clean, piped water due to the scarcity and contamination of the coastal aquifer. However, this solution comes with significant financial and health-related drawbacks. Despite the region's widespread poverty, families are often forced to spend a large portion of their meager income on purchasing water from these private vendors. For many, this expense is a crucial part of their daily survival, even though they are already struggling to make ends meet in one of the most economically deprived regions of the world. The cost of water from private vendors in Gaza is exorbitant compared to municipal tap water. In fact, it can be up to 30 times more expensive than the cost of water from the municipal system, which is often either non-existent or unreliable due to the severe strain on infrastructure. This price difference makes water an unaffordable necessity for many residents, forcing them into difficult choices between paying for water or meeting other basic needs, such as food.
Gazans are now almost completely dependent on the food trucked in by aid organizations,
Medicine, or education. The cost of water purchased from vendors can consume a significant percentage of a family's income, especially in Gaza's impoverished conditions, where the average household income is extremely low. This creates a cycle of financial strain that worsens the overall living conditions of the population. However, the issue is not only about the prohibitive cost of purchasing water, but also about the quality of the water being supplied. Despite the high price, the water provided by private vendors is often drawn from the same polluted coastal aquifer that supplies the majority of Gaza's drinking water. The aquifer has been heavily contaminated by over-extraction, nitrate pollution, and seawater intrusion, making it unsafe for consumption. As a result, even when residents pay exorbitant prices for water, they are still often receiving water that is undrinkable or poses serious health risks. The water's high salinity, presence of nitrates, and contamination with other pollutants make it unsuitable for safe consumption. The impact of using such contaminated water is widespread and devastating, particularly for the most vulnerable members of the population, including children. Reports indicate that around 50% of children in Gaza suffer from waterborne diseases, including diarrhea, cholera, and typhoid fever, which are directly linked to the consumption of unsafe water. These illnesses place an enormous burden on the local healthcare system, which is already under considerable stress due to the ongoing conflict and the blockades that limit access to medical supplies and treatment. For farmers in Gaza, the situation is equally dire. Many agricultural producers are forced to use the same contaminated water sources to irrigate their crops, as they have little choice but to rely on what is available. Unfortunately, the use of polluted water for irrigation leads to crop failures, as the water's high salinity and contamination adversely affect soil quality and crop health. This has devastating effects on Gaza's agricultural sector.
Gaza's farmland has been a lifeline, fertile fields sustaining a population under siege,
reducing food production and exacerbating food insecurity. The economic impact of this crisis is far-reaching, as water scarcity and contamination affect both the health and agricultural sectors. They place immense pressure on Gaza's economy. The high cost of purchasing water from private vendors, combined with the loss of income from failed crops and the cost of medical treatment for waterborne illnesses, creates a vicious cycle of poverty and deprivation. The cost of water alone can push families further into debt, leaving them vulnerable to financial collapse and making it even harder to invest in long-term solutions to the water crisis.
Essential supplies like food, water and electricity, all these things have become a luxury for many.
Despite the severity of the situation, the private water vendor industry in Gaza remains largely unregulated. Without proper oversight or quality control, many vendors exploit the desperation of the population by providing water that is often no better than what they would receive from municipal sources, but at a far higher price. This lack of regulation allows vendors to continue profiting from the crisis without addressing the underlying issues of water contamination and scarcity. Some private water vendors even reuse or repackage water from dubious sources without adequately treating it, further endangering public health. The international community has recognized the critical nature of the water crisis in Gaza and has provided some humanitarian aid to alleviate the problem, such as setting up water purification systems and desalination plants. However, these efforts have been limited in scope and are often hindered by the ongoing blockade and the region's political instability. The aid that does arrive is frequently insufficient to meet the demands of the population, and the aid distribution is often caught up in bureaucratic delays and logistical challenges. The lack of a cohesive and sustainable long-term solution has left Gaza's residents with few options but to continue relying on the expensive and unsafe water provided by private vendors. This brings us to the one solution that seems to work the best. What if we just desalinated the Mediterranean water? With the Mediterranean Sea bordering Gaza, the potential to utilize seawater as a reliable source of drinkable water is a vital opportunity to address Gaza's water crisis. Back in January 2017, a significant step forward in addressing the region's water crisis occurred with the opening of a desalination plant in Deir al-Balah, located in the central Gaza Strip. This facility, which uses reverse osmosis technology, marked a pivotal moment in the region's water management efforts. Reverse osmosis is a filtration process that forces seawater through a semi-permeable membrane under high pressure to remove salt, minerals, and other impurities. The result is fresh, drinkable water that can be used for domestic consumption. This desalination plant in Deir al-Balah was expected to provide a much-needed boost to Gaza's limited supply of clean water, benefiting both residential areas and agricultural sectors. Despite the promising nature of this technology, desalination in Gaza is not without its challenges. The process itself requires a significant amount of energy to operate, which is a critical issue in Gaza due to its already strained electricity supply.
Israel cut off the electricity supply to Gaza, and that has affected operations at a desalination plant.
The region's energy infrastructure, which is heavily reliant on limited and intermittent sources, makes it difficult to ensure a continuous and reliable supply of electricity for desalination plants. Gaza's power grid is subject to frequent outages due to the ongoing conflict and blockades, which severely limit the ability of desalination plants to operate at full capacity. The shortage of energy further exacerbates the water scarcity problem, and means that even desalination efforts can only go so far in addressing the needs of Gaza's population. Additionally, the financial costs associated with desalination are high. The initial investment required to construct and maintain a desalination plant is substantial, and operating such a facility is energy-intensive. For Gaza, which is under a strict blockade and faces significant economic constraints, securing the necessary funding and resources for desalination infrastructure remains a constant struggle, while international aid has been crucial in establishing desalination plants. The long-term viability of these systems depends on sustainable funding, as well as access to the materials and technical expertise required to keep the plants running. As of 2023, the desalination plants in Gaza are still only able to meet a fraction of the population's water needs, leaving many residents to rely on unsafe and expensive water from private vendors or contaminated wells. The environmental impact of desalination is another concern. Although desalination provides a reliable source of fresh water, it also generates brine, a highly concentrated saline byproduct that is typically released back into the sea. In Gaza, where the Mediterranean is already under strain due to pollution and overuse, the release of brine could exacerbate local marine ecosystem problems. Improper disposal of brine can harm marine life, particularly in shallow coastal areas where the brine can accumulate and disrupt the balance of salt and minerals in the water. This is a significant concern, as the Mediterranean is a vital resource for fishing and other maritime industries in Gaza, which are already impacted by pollution and overfishing. Furthermore, while desalination plants like the one in Deir al-Balah provide clean water, they do not address the underlying causes of Gaza's water crisis, such as over-extraction of the coastal aquifer, contamination from wastewater, and the lack of a reliable and sustainable water management infrastructure. Desalination can be part of the solution, but it is not the full remedy. A comprehensive approach to solving Gaza's water crisis must include improvements to wastewater treatment systems, better management of existing water resources, and investments in renewable energy sources to support desalination technology. Without addressing these interconnected issues, desalination alone may not be enough to secure a long-term, sustainable water supply for Gaza. Moreover, the desalination plants in Gaza, which have been constructed with international support, are not without their political and logistical complications. The ongoing blockade and restrictions on the movement of goods and people in and out of Gaza make it difficult to maintain and repair these facilities. The importation of necessary spare parts, chemicals, and technical expertise is often delayed or obstructed, further limiting the effectiveness of desalination efforts. Additionally, the political situation surrounding Gaza means that the coordination of water and energy resources between different Palestinian factions, as well as between Gaza and Israel, is fraught with difficulty. This political instability hampers the efficient and equitable distribution of desalinated water and complicates any long-term strategy to address Gaza's water needs. Despite these challenges, desalination remains one of the most promising solutions to Gaza's water crisis. The technology offers the potential to provide a reliable and independent source of fresh water from the Mediterranean Sea, which could alleviate some of the pressure on the coastal aquifer and reduce Gaza's dependence on contaminated or expensive private water supplies. So, what has this approach given the people of Gaza so far? Coverage and impact of the Deir al-Balah plant, built by UNICEF. With the support of the European Union, the Deir al-Balah desalination plant
in Deir al-Balah, it is still working, but at a reduced capacity, so people are able to come in.
Is designed to provide a sustainable and clean source of potable water to the southern part of the Gaza Strip, an area home to approximately 800,000 people, or 64% of Gaza's total population. The plant, located in the central region of Gaza, primarily serves the cities of Khan Yunis and Rafah, two highly populated and water-stressed areas in Gaza's southern governorates. Upon its initial operation, the Deir al-Balah plant was capable of producing 1.6 million gallons of desalinated water per day, a significant contribution to the daily water needs of Gaza's southern population. This volume was sufficient to meet the needs of approximately 75,000 residents in Khan Yunis and Rafah, providing much-needed relief to the communities in these areas that have long struggled with access to clean water. However, while 1.6 million gallons per day is a substantial contribution, it is far from sufficient to meet the needs of the entire southern Gaza population, let alone the broader Gaza Strip, which has a population of more than 2 million people. Given that over-extraction of the coastal aquifer and contamination from sewage and waste has rendered much of Gaza's groundwater undrinkable, there is an urgent need for more desalination plants or increased capacity at existing ones to ensure a reliable and sufficient water supply for all residents. At the current rate of water production, the Deir al-Balah plant is able to serve only a fraction of the population in its service area, and its output is far less than what is required to eliminate the dependence on unsafe water sources. Moreover, the plant is highly dependent on a consistent and reliable electricity supply, which is a persistent issue in Gaza. The region's energy infrastructure is strained, with frequent power outages and limited access to fuel, which severely affect the operation of the desalination plant. Although the EU and UNICEF have provided some support for the plant's energy needs, the lack of reliable power sources means that the plant cannot operate continuously, leading to interruptions in the water supply. The dependence on external energy sources and the unreliable nature of Gaza's electricity grid make it difficult to maintain a consistent and adequate water production capacity. Cost is another concern for many residents in Gaza. While the Deir al-Balah plant provides a source of fresh water, the cost of desalinated water is significantly higher than the price of water from the coastal aquifer, which is already contaminated. The cost of desalinated water is passed on to residents, who often find it unaffordable, especially given the region's high unemployment rate and widespread poverty. The plant's operation is also heavily influenced by the political situation in Gaza. Then there's an electricity shortfall, too. The electricity shortage and its effects on desalination. Historically, Gaza's power station was supplemented by energy imports from Egypt and Israel, but the disruptions that began after 2013, due to ongoing political and military conflicts, have left Gaza in a critical state of energy deprivation. The region has experienced prolonged periods of electricity shortages, resulting in a system of power rationing that limits the availability of electricity to only a few hours per day. This unreliable supply has not only affected daily life for Gaza's residents, but has also had devastating impacts on vital infrastructure, such as the Deir al-Balah desalination plant. Desalination, which relies on reverse osmosis technology, requires a consistent and substantial electricity supply to function. In 2017, the gap between the region's power demand and its actual supply was glaring. Gaza's power demand during this period ranged between 400 and 600 megawatts, far outstripping the capacity of the local power plant and the limited imports from neighboring countries. In reality, the actual power supply to Gaza during this time was significantly lower than required to meet even the basic needs of the population. Reports indicated that Gaza received between 180 to 220 megawatts of electricity, a fraction of what was needed. This shortage of electricity has exacerbated an already dire humanitarian situation, as residents are left without consistent access to power for lighting, cooking, and running essential services. The chronic energy shortage, in turn, prevents key infrastructure from functioning properly, including water desalination and treatment facilities, which rely on steady electricity. The lack of adequate power also affects Gaza's sewage and wastewater treatment plants. These facilities require continuous electricity to process wastewater safely and prevent further contamination of the region's groundwater, which is already tainted by pollutants and sewage runoff. Without electricity to run pumps, filtration systems, and treatment operations, wastewater is often discharged untreated into the environment, leading to further pollution of water sources. This situation creates a vicious cycle in which a lack of electricity results in contamination of water supplies, further exacerbating the region's already severe water crisis. The ongoing energy crisis in Gaza has led to a reliance on emergency power solutions such as generators, to keep essential services running. However, these generators are costly to operate, and their fuel is scarce and expensive. In addition to being financially unsustainable, the use of diesel-powered generators adds to the environmental degradation of the region, contributing to air pollution and further strains on Gaza's limited resources. Furthermore, the reliance on generators for desalination plants is not a long-term solution, as the cost of running these machines exceeds the capacity of many residents and government authorities to sustain it. The electricity shortage has also severely impacted Gaza's already fragile economy. The region's power constraints prevent businesses, schools, hospitals, and other essential services from operating at full capacity, hindering efforts to rebuild and develop Gaza. The impact on the private sector is particularly harsh, as businesses that rely on consistent electricity, such as those involved in agriculture, manufacturing, and healthcare, face increased operating costs and diminished productivity. These challenges contribute to widespread unemployment and poverty in Gaza, exacerbating the already precarious living conditions for residents. While international aid and humanitarian efforts have helped to alleviate some of the impacts of the electricity shortage, they have been unable to provide a sustainable solution to Gaza's energy crisis. The international community has invested in small-scale solar power projects and has attempted to secure additional energy imports from Egypt and Israel, but these efforts have had limited success in meeting Gaza's overall electricity demand. Given the ongoing political and logistical barriers, there is no immediate prospect of the electricity situation improving in the short term. The lack of political agreement and the continuing blockade make it difficult for Gaza to secure the resources needed for long-term energy sustainability. The political aspect of Gaza's energy crisis is critical. Energy supply in Gaza is heavily influenced by the political conflict between Hamas, the governing authority in Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority, which holds influence in the West Bank. This divide has led to competition over resources, including energy imports, and has further complicated efforts to secure stable electricity supplies. Additionally, Israel's control over Gaza's borders and infrastructure, including energy imports, has meant that any disruptions or changes in Israeli policy can have immediate and profound consequences for Gaza's electricity supply. Restrictions on fuel imports, particularly from Israel, have led to fuel shortages that further exacerbate the region's power crisis. As long as Gaza faces an acute and persistent electricity shortage, desalination plants will continue to operate at a diminished capacity, unable to fully meet the water needs of the population. The ongoing power shortage is thus a fundamental barrier to solving the water crisis in Gaza, and without a comprehensive resolution to both the energy and water challenges, the region will remain trapped in a cycle of scarcity and dependency. The energy crisis, exacerbated by the political instability and logistical challenges in Gaza, is a major barrier to improving the living conditions of the population and ensuring sustainable access to clean water. To achieve long-term solutions to Gaza's water crisis, a comprehensive approach must be taken that addresses both the electricity shortages and the water scarcity, ensuring that residents have access to the resources they need to survive and thrive. One can at least hope for a better future. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.